Yesterday, Iran called to negotiate. Yesterday, the leaders of Iran called. They want to negotiate. I think they're tired of being beat up by the United States. Iran wants to negotiate. Yes. We may meet with them. I mean, a meeting is being set up, but we may have to act because of what's happening before the meeting. But a meeting is being set up. Iran called. They want to negotiate.
538 people are dead. The internet has been shut down for 84 consecutive hours. A United States aircraft carrier is racing toward the Persian Gulf. And Donald Trump just claimed that Iran's leadership called him begging to negotiate, while simultaneously threatening military strikes at levels they've never experienced before.
Military and commercial bases as legitimate targets if you struck. Are you concerned about...
If they do that, we'll consider things targets that they wouldn't believe. If they do that, we will hit them at levels that they've never been hit before. They won't even believe it. I have options that are so strong. So, I mean, if they did that, it'll be met with a very, very powerful force.
So here's what nobody's saying out loud. Is this the final collapse of the Islamic Republic, or are we about to witness the opening move of a war that reshapes the entire Middle East? Because what's happening right now in Iran isn't just another round of protests. It's not just another economic crisis. Something fundamental has fractured, and the next 72 hours will determine whether this ends in revolution, negotiation, or something far more dangerous. Stay with me, because what I'm about to walk you through is unfolding faster than any news organization can process. And the pieces you're not hearing about are the ones that matter most. Let me take you back to September, because that's when the fuse was actually lit. The United Kingdom, France, and Germany, collectively known as the E3, triggered something called the snapback mechanism. If you haven't heard of it, you're not alone. It's buried deep in the fine print of the 2015 nuclear agreement, and it was designed to do one thing: economically strangle Iran if they violated the terms. And that's exactly what happened. Years of quiet violations, uranium enrichment beyond agreed limits, restricted access for inspectors, it all reached a breaking point. The snapback wasn't a new sanction. It was the instant return of every major United Nations penalty that had been frozen for nearly a decade. Iran went from heavily sanctioned to completely suffocated overnight. But here's where the story takes a darker turn. And this is what most analysts missed at the time. The Iranian government, already hemorrhaging money, made a decision that would prove catastrophic. They ended the subsidized exchange rate for importers. Now stay with me on this because it sounds technical, but it's actually brutally simple. For years, the government had been artificially propping up the currency so businesses could import food, medicine, and fuel without going bankrupt. That safety net just vanished. And when it did, the cost of basic necessities, bread, rice, cooking oil, skyrocketed. We're not talking about a 10 or 15% increase. We're talking about families who could afford 3 meals a day last month now rationing food. On December 28th, the rial collapsed. But what happened in the next 72 hours is what terrified Western intelligence agencies, because it wasn't spontaneous.
About whether you are moving closer, or you believe the U.S. is moving closer to striking Iranian nuclear facilities. Where's your mindset on that?
I can't say that, right? You don't seriously think I'm going to answer that question. Will you strike the Iranian nuclear component? And Iran's got a lot of trouble, and they want to negotiate. And I said, why didn't you negotiate with me before? All this death and destruction. Why didn't you negotiate? I said to the people, why didn't you negotiate with me 2 weeks ago? You could have done fine. You would have had a country. It's very sad to watch this. I mean, I've never seen anything like it. It's so... everyone thought it was going to be the reverse. I didn't think so. And I was telling them, you gotta do something. You gotta negotiate.
The protests erupted in nearly every province, not just Tehran, not just the usual activist strongholds. This was nationwide, simultaneous, and organized in ways that caught the regime completely off guard. Students, factory workers, shopkeepers, people who had never attended a political demonstration in their lives were suddenly flooding the streets, and the government's response wasn't dialogue, it wasn't economic relief, it was force. Verified reports now confirm at least 538 people have been killed. 490 of them were protesters. The Norway-based Iran Human Rights Organization has officially classified this as a mass killing. And they don't use that language lightly. We're not just talking about statistics. We're talking about a student shot at close range. We're talking about footage authenticated by Agence France Presse showing dozens of bodies outside a morgue south of Tehran. We're talking about 10,600 people arrested in less than a week. But here's what makes this different from every other crackdown Iran has executed over the past 4 decades. For over 84 hours, the regime cut off the internet, not slowed it down, not restricted access to certain platforms. According to NetBlocks, the internet monitoring organization, the blackout was near total. They flipped the switch because they didn't want the world to see what they were doing. And this was the moment the protests stopped being a domestic issue and became an international crisis. Because when you shut down the internet in 2026, you're not just silencing your population. You're sending a signal to every intelligence agency, every foreign government, every human rights organization on the planet that something has gone catastrophically wrong. And the people inside Iran knew it too. Activists started using Starlink satellite connections smuggled in through the northern border, shortwave radio broadcasts from Europe, satellite phones routed through Turkey. The footage started leaking out anyway, grainy, shaky, but undeniable. And Donald Trump, whether calculated or impulsive, mentioned in a press conference that he might speak with Elon Musk about getting internet access restored in Iran. Think about that for a second. The President of the United States is publicly discussing bypassing a foreign government's communications blackout using a private company's satellite network. That's not diplomacy. That's a preview of what 21st century conflict actually looks like. But inside Iran, the narrative is completely different. President Masoud Pezeshkian appeared on state television calling the protesters urban terrorist criminals. He claimed that foreign agents, specifically from what he called arch-foes, had infiltrated the demonstrations to destabilize the country. They even organized something called a national resistance march, trying to demonstrate that the government still commands public support. Except the images that leaked out told a very different story. Now, while the streets of Iranian cities are in chaos, the most unpredictable leader in the world is weighing his options. And this is where the situation becomes genuinely dangerous. Donald Trump has publicly stated he is considering very strong military action against Iran, but it's not just rhetoric this time. The USS Abraham Lincoln, a nuclear-powered supercarrier capable of launching over 70 aircraft, is currently en route to the Persian Gulf. This deployment isn't symbolic. It's designed to give the president what military planners call expanded operational options. Right now, there are 30,000 United States troops stationed across the Middle East. 3 guided missile destroyers and advanced air defense systems are heading toward Israel. Trump has warned, in his characteristic blunt style, that if Iran strikes American assets or personnel, he will retaliate at levels they've never been hit before. But here's where it gets complicated, and this is the part most news coverage is missing. Behind the scenes, United States officials are deeply divided. Some advisors see this as a once-in-a-generation opportunity, a chance to decisively end the nuclear question, to support a popular uprising, and to fundamentally reshape the balance of power in the region. Others are warning that even a limited military strike could ignite a chain reaction. Lebanon, Yemen, the Strait of Hormuz, Iraq, Syria. We're not talking about a contained conflict. We're talking about the potential for a regional war that could pull in multiple countries, disrupt global oil supplies, and create a humanitarian catastrophe that makes the current situation look manageable by comparison. And then Trump dropped another bombshell. In classic Trump fashion, he claimed on Sunday that the Iranian leadership had called him. A meeting is being set up, he told reporters. They want to negotiate. They're tired of being beaten up by the United States. Now, Iran's foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, immediately denied this, calling it psychological warfare. But whether the call happened or not almost doesn't matter, because Trump has created a narrative that puts him in control of the story. He's simultaneously the potential dealmaker and the potential destroyer. When a reporter asked if Iran had crossed his red line, Trump gave an answer that was both vague and ominous. They're starting to, he said. People are being killed that aren't supposed to be killed. Notice the phrasing, not they've crossed it. Not they haven't crossed it, they're starting to. That's deliberate ambiguity, and it keeps every option on the table while keeping adversaries guessing. This is Trump operating in the space he's most comfortable in, maximum pressure, unpredictable signals, and the constant threat of escalation. But it also means that the next move could come from anywhere, a drone strike, a cyber attack, a special forces operation, or genuinely a phone call that leads to a summit. Nobody knows, and that uncertainty is part of the strategy. Meanwhile, as the regime teeters, a ghost from Iran's past has re-emerged. Reza Pahlavi, the son of the last Shah of Iran who was overthrown in 1979, has become one of the most prominent voices in this movement. Pahlavi, who has lived in exile in the United States for decades, recently stated that he is prepared to return to Iran to help lead a transition to a democratic government. For many protesters, especially younger Iranians who have no memory of the Shah's rule, his name represents something aspirational, a connection to a time before the current system, before the economic collapse, before the isolation. But for others, particularly older Iranians and those who lived through the revolution, it's far more complicated. The Shah's government was autocratic, propped up by Western powers, and ultimately overthrown because it lost legitimacy with its own people. So the question isn't whether Pahlavi has support, the question is whether that support is broad enough, durable enough, and organized enough to actually build something functional if the current regime falls. And here's the historical warning that almost nobody is discussing right now. Revolutions don't fail because dictators fall. They fail because no one agrees on what replaces them. Look at Libya after Gaddafi. Look at Iraq after Saddam. Look at Syria after the uprising against Assad. The collapse of an authoritarian system doesn't automatically lead to democracy. It often leads to chaos, competing factions, foreign intervention, and in many cases, something worse than what came before. The international reaction has been swift but fragmented. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, speaking from India, called the regime's use of brutal violence a sign of weakness. He demanded it stop immediately. The European Union issued statements condemning the crackdown. Human rights organizations are calling for investigations, but statements don't stop bullets, and condemnations don't restore internet access. Iran's foreign minister fired back, claiming the protests are under total control. He accused the demonstrators of turning violent, specifically to give Trump a pretext to intervene militarily. He's framing this as a Western-backed coup attempt, not an organic uprising driven by economic desperation. And while that narrative might sound absurd to outside observers, it plays domestically. It allows the regime to justify the crackdown, to rally nationalist sentiment, and to paint anyone who opposes them as a foreign agent. But with 10,000 people arrested, 500 dead, and the military on high alert, the word control feels increasingly hollow. Because if you actually had control, you wouldn't need to shut down the internet for 4 straight days. You wouldn't need to deploy paramilitary forces to every major city. You wouldn't need to threaten overwhelming violence just to keep people off the streets. And here's something else most people aren't considering. The supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, is 86 years old. He's ruled Iran for over 3 decades, and there's been persistent speculation about his health for years now. Reports of surgery, rumors of cancer, carefully staged public appearances designed to project strength. But age is catching up, and the question of succession has never been more relevant. Because if Khamenei dies or becomes incapacitated in the middle of this crisis, there's no clear successor, no consensus within the ruling elite, no mechanism that guarantees a smooth transition. That vacuum could be the final trigger that brings the entire system down, or it could lead to an internal power struggle that's even more violent than what we're seeing on the streets right now. Different factions within the Revolutionary Guard, different clerical authorities, different political interests, all fighting for control, and while they're fighting each other, the protesters keep marching, the economy keeps collapsing, and the international pressure keeps mounting. This is the nightmare scenario that keeps regional analysts up at night. Not a clean revolution, not a negotiated transition, but a chaotic implosion with nuclear facilities, ballistic missiles, and proxy militias scattered across the region, all suddenly up for grabs. So where does this leave us right now today as you're watching this? We have a regime that has killed over 500 of its own citizens in less than a week. We have a currency that has lost virtually all its value. We have a United States president with a carrier strike group in the water and a phone line that may or may not be open for negotiations. We have a population that has tasted the possibility of change and is now willing to risk everything for it. And we have a supreme leader, 86 years old, who has spent his entire life consolidating power and is now facing the most serious challenge to his rule in decades. The next 48 to 72 hours are genuinely critical. If the government's so-called National Resistance March fails to draw significant crowds and the protests continue, the regime will face a choice. Either escalate to full military crackdown, martial law, mass arrests on a scale we haven't seen yet, or start making concessions. And concessions could be interpreted as weakness and accelerate their collapse. And if Trump decides that his red line has been crossed, either because American assets are threatened or because he sees a strategic opportunity, we could be looking at direct military confrontation between the United States and Iran, something both countries have danced around for 40 years, but never fully committed to. Think of it this way. Iran right now is a wire that's been pulled too tight for too long, and it's finally snapped. The government is trying to grab both ends and twist them back together, but every time they touch it, they get shocked. The question is whether someone, either the protesters from below or a foreign power from above, cuts the wire entirely. And if that happens, what comes next is completely unknown. Here's what we know for certain. The economic collapse is real. The government's legitimacy is eroding faster than at any point since the revolution. The international pressure is mounting, the military options are on the table, and the people in the streets have already paid the ultimate price, which means they have less to lose than they did a week ago. But here's what we don't know. We don't know if the protests have reached critical mass or if they'll be suppressed like they were in 2019, in 2009, in 2003. We don't know if Trump is bluffing about military action or if he's genuinely preparing for strikes. We don't know if Reza Pahlavi represents a viable alternative or just a symbolic figurehead. We don't know if the Iranian military and Revolutionary Guard will stay loyal to Khamenei or if fractures are already forming behind closed doors. And most importantly, we don't know how this ends. If the internet stays dark for another week, this story will look very different than if it comes back online tomorrow. If it comes back and the protests have been crushed, the regime survives, but is weaker, more paranoid, more isolated. If it comes back and the streets are still full, we're in completely uncharted territory. And if it doesn't come back at all, that tells us something even more disturbing. That the government has decided transparency is too dangerous, that they're willing to operate in total information darkness because what they're doing can't be shown to the world. Every scenario leads somewhere different. Every decision in Washington, in Tehran, in European capitals, in the streets of Isfahan and Shiraz and Tabriz, every single one of those decisions is compounding on top of each other in real time. This isn't a situation where we can wait for the history books to tell us what happened. This is happening now, and the outcome is still completely fluid. So here's what I'm watching for in the coming days. First, does the internet come back? And if so, what does the footage show? Second, does Trump's carrier group take up position, and does he issue any new ultimatums? Third, do we see any cracks in the Iranian security forces? Any defections? Any signs that the people with guns are questioning their orders? Fourth, does the protest movement develop clear leadership and demands, or does it remain decentralized and reactive? And fifth, do any other regional players, Saudi Arabia, Israel, Turkey, make moves that either escalate or de-escalate the situation? Because this isn't just about Iran anymore. It's about what kind of Middle East emerges from this moment. It's about whether popular uprisings can still succeed in the 21st century, or whether authoritarian regimes have perfected the tools of suppression. It's about whether the United States is willing to back its rhetoric with action, or if this is another round of sanctions and strongly worded statements. It's about whether the international community can actually coordinate a response, or if everyone just watches from the sidelines. And ultimately, it's about whether 88 million people get a say in their own future, or whether that future is decided by a small group of aging clerics who are more afraid of losing power than they are of losing legitimacy. The stakes couldn't be higher, the variables couldn't be more complex, and the timeline couldn't be more compressed. We'll know soon, very soon, which direction this goes. And when we do, this video will need an update because the story is far from over. But let's zoom out for a moment and talk about what this means for the rest of us. Because Iran isn't happening in a vacuum. The global order that's been relatively stable since the end of the Cold War is showing cracks everywhere. We're seeing authoritarian governments challenged from within. We're seeing democratic nations questioning their own alliances. We're seeing technology, satellites, social media, encrypted messaging, changing the very nature of resistance and control. What happens in Iran over the next few weeks could set a precedent. If the protests succeed, if the regime actually falls, it sends a message to every other authoritarian government on the planet that even total internet blackouts can be bypassed, that even mass arrests can't stop a movement if the economic pain is deep enough, that even decades of control can unravel in a matter of days. But if the regime survives this, if they crush the protests and restore their grip on power, that sends a different message. That digital authoritarianism works, that killing hundreds of your own citizens is an acceptable price for stability, that the international community will issue statements but won't actually intervene, and other governments will take notes. China is watching, Russia is watching, North Korea is watching. They're all studying what works and what doesn't, and the Iranian people know this too. They know the world is watching. They know that if they fail, it won't just be their own future that's lost. It'll be a signal to every other population living under repression that resistance is futile. That's the weight they're carrying right now. That's why the next few days matter so much. There's also the economic dimension that extends far beyond Iran's borders. The Strait of Hormuz, which Iran controls, is one of the most strategically vital waterways on Earth. About 20% of the world's oil supply passes through it every single day. If this crisis escalates into a military conflict, if Iran decides to close the strait, or if the United States decides to enforce passage by force, we're looking at an immediate global oil shock. Prices could double overnight. Supply chains that are still recovering from the pandemic would be hit again. Inflation, which many countries just started getting under control, would spike. This isn't just a Middle Eastern problem. It's a global economic problem waiting to happen. And that's why you're seeing such careful language from European leaders, from Asian governments, from oil-dependent economies everywhere. They don't want regime change if it means regional chaos, but they also can't publicly support a government that's killing protesters. So they're stuck in this uncomfortable middle ground, issuing condemnations while quietly hoping someone else solves the problem. And then there's the nuclear question, which has been hovering in the background this entire time. Iran's nuclear program didn't stop when the protests started. The centrifuges are still spinning, the enrichment is still happening, and if the government falls, who controls those facilities? If there's a power vacuum, if there's internal conflict between different factions, does someone make a desperate move? Does a hardline military commander decide to accelerate the program as a final act of defiance? Does a reformist faction offer to dismantle it in exchange for international recognition? Or does the whole thing just sit there, unguarded, while the country tears itself apart? These are the scenarios that keep non-proliferation experts awake at night, because nuclear materials don't care about political transitions. They don't wait for new governments to form. They're just there, and whoever controls them has leverage. Dangerous, destabilizing, potentially catastrophic leverage. So when you step back and look at the full picture, what you're seeing in Iran right now isn't just a domestic crisis. It's a stress test for the entire international system. It's a test of whether sanctions actually work or just punish ordinary people. It's a test of whether technology can empower protesters or just give governments new tools for control. It's a test of whether the United States still has the influence, the credibility, and the strategy to shape outcomes in the Middle East. It's a test of whether popular movements can succeed against modern authoritarian states. And it's a test of whether the world can respond to a crisis like this without making it worse. Right now, all of those tests are happening simultaneously, and we won't know the results until it's over. Before we close, one quick clarification. Everything in this video is based on public information, historical context, and my own analysis. It's not a call to action, not an instruction, and not a claim about anyone's intentions. It's simply one perspective on a fast-changing situation. Reasonable people can see the same facts and reach different conclusions, and that's healthy. No matter where you stand, the goal should always be the same: stability, accountability, and peace, without fear or hate. You're welcome to share your own perspective in the comments, respectfully and thoughtfully. Thank you for watching and for thinking critically. Subscribe for more calm, fact-driven deep dives.